So let's see the demo configuration. We have this cluster wherein we have default and prod namespace. We'll have a separate network with the CIDR block 17.11.00/16, and we'll have a pod or deployment in default namespace and another set of pods or deployments in prod namespace. And also we have a server which can be either an EC2 instance or a GC compute engine instance. Now we are going to create network policy for the deployment or pods which are in this default namespace. So we'll call this as blue pod, and blue pods should allow machines from 17.11.00/16 to run curl commands. Similarly, outgoing traffic from blue pod to prod namespace should be allowed. Now here we are talking about namespace. So the egress from blue pod to orange or green pods in the orange in namespace should be allowed. Also at the end we'll allow some orange pods in the same default namespace to curl. Now we'll try to do things one by one. So first let us go ahead and create a deployment with blue pod, and also we'll create a service for that. Now this time we'll be using AWS EC2 instance rather than Google Cloud Compute Engine instances, and I'm starting with a clean slate. There's nothing, no resources available, hopefully. So first of all, let's see the namespaces. So we do not have any prod namespace, and let's see if we have any resources in default namespace. Okay, there are some resources available. I'll delete them. Alright, so I have deleted everything, and let's see if default namespace have any resource. There's no resource available. So this cluster IP is the default cluster IP which is provided by Kubernetes. Okay, so let's see the deployment and service manifest file for BluePod. And this is the file 9.14 pod with http in default namespace.yml. So everything is pretty straightforward. This is the deployment, these are the labels, and we are running 2 replicas, and in the selector I'm mentioning chapter security topic network policy in namespace default, color is blue, and this is the pod template. The name of the pods would be pod with http in default namespace -pod, and the label should be chapter security topic network policy in namespace default and color blue, and these are the specifications. And in the same file I'm creating the service also for this pod, or for this deployment, sorry, and the service type is node port so that it is accessible from outside of the cluster. So let us go ahead and create this deployment and this service. So I've copied and pasted. One thing I want you to be very careful about, that after you do a copy and paste, please check the indentation so that everything is correct. Otherwise you might get errors. So here if you see, all these things have lost their indentation. I'll have to fix it. Okay, so I hope it is fine now. So let's run this, and it will be, these resources would be created in the default namespace. Okay, so fair enough, kubectl get all, and the service, the deployment, replica set and pods, all of them have been created and they are running. Let's take a look whether it is working or not. The service is SVC, this is the one, and this is the node port, and this is the cluster IP. If we do a curl, I should be able to get some output with port number 8080, and there you go, this is the output which is expected. Let us try to describe the namespace default, and if you see, there are no labels. I mean, there's a label called created by, which I have put by myself, but if you check it in your machine, you'll not find any label for this namespace. So let us go ahead and add some labels to this namespace. So this is the label that I'm going to mention, tier frontend, and let me add one more label, and the label would be environment prod. So now if I do a describe of the namespace, now you see I have 3 labels created by default, environment prod, and tier is frontend. So part 1 is done. We have made all the modifications necessary for this particular section, which is frontend. Let us go ahead and do the same for this one. First, we'll have to create a prod namespace. And the file is 9.13-prod namespace.yml. If you see, this namespace is also a little different because I have added labels here. First, the namespace for is network policy, environment prod, and the APPL is 3-tier. Or I'll change it and I'll make tier to be backend. And that's all. So let us go ahead and create this namespace. So prod namespace has been created with all the labels that we have put. The next thing would be to create the deployment for this pod and its corresponding service. And you'll find that in 9.15-pod with http in prod ns.yml. Alright, I have copied and pasted, and I have to make sure that the indentations are correct, otherwise YAML will complain and I'll not be able to run this in the first go. I think everything is fine so far. And this container port indentation should be correct, and in the service I hope. Okay, so the target port indentation is not right, so is this port. Hopefully everything is fine. Let us go ahead and create it in prod namespace. It has been created. I hope you notice that the labels of the pods are different. We have chapter security, topic network policy, in namespace prod, and the color is green. Okay, so let's do a kubectl get all in prod namespace, and we have everything available. Let's do a curl of this cluster IP with port 8000, and I should be able to get some output, and there you go. So this piece is also done. The next thing that I have to do is that create a server or create an EC2 instance in the VPC with network address 17.11.00/16. So I have created this EC2 instance, EC2 outside of K8s cluster, and this is in a separate network altogether. It does not match the network of the Kubernetes cluster, which is 172.168.172.171. Neither does it match with the pod network range, which was 10.168.0.0/16. So all the three things have been done. We have created the EC2 instance outside of the cluster. We have labeled the default namespace and created a deployment and a service for this deployment. We have created one more namespace prod and a deployment with cluster IP service. Now both the namespaces are labeled properly. Now let us go ahead and create the network policy for this pod or blue pod, or the deployment of blue pod.